and to me, that's unacceptable. But today is not about those failed politicians. It's about the men and women who actually carried the weight of defending this nation, those who answered the call, served with honor, sacrificed without ever asking for recognition. And our next guest is one of those great men. Ed Gallrein is a fifth-generation Kentucky farmer. He's been in family farming. His family's been in farming for over 100 years. 3 decades as a Navy SEAL, which is incredible, and one of the few to earn an Army Ranger qualification. He has 2 prestigious Presidential Unit citations, 4 Bronze Stars, and the only Navy SEAL to earn the Army Combat Parachutist Badge. Unbelievable. And he continues to serve us today by leading a nonprofit that supports veterans and their families. So, without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Ed Gallrein.
Thank you. Again, I will only accept that applause on behalf of our nation and those I served with, to include Senior Chief Steve Brown right here, Navy SEAL folks, Silver Star winners in your presence today. Thank you for coming, Steve. Humble as the day is long. You'd have never heard that from him, but I'm going to sing his praises. Before I start here, I want to start with laying the groundwork. If we do not take advantage of this narrow window of opportunity we have, history will punish us. With President Trump and the leadership team he's arrayed. And the way that works is they punish us through our kids and our grandkids. So I want to build on your remarks, Ashley, to really put a fine point on that. All that to say, thank y'all for coming today. Honor me with your presence. I'll make a few remarks in preparation of the Honorable Pete Hegseth that's arriving. Good afternoon. It's my privilege to welcome the Honorable Pete Hegseth here today. He'll be here shortly, and I'm going to tell him, welcome to the Heartland, Ranger Hegseth. You might be aware he's also an Army Ranger. And let me say this clearly. There has never been a more important time to stand behind our president, President Trump, and the courageous leaders he has put in place to fight for the future of the United States military, like Pete Hegseth. President Trump knows that, and we all know that. For 4 long years under Joe Biden, we watched the strongest fighting force in human history drift into weakness, confusion, and political insanity. I spent my career in uniform, conducting sensitive activities and operations around the globe, from Panama to the Persian Gulf and other areas I can never mention due to their secretive nature, including long hours and direct communications with the highest levels of U.S. military leadership, because the stakes were high as they are now. And that included the President's White House Situation Room, where decisions carried life and death consequences. I led men in combat. I lost teammates. The military I first served in under President Reagan was built around one simple principle: fight and win our nation's wars. That was mission first. Not politics, not ideology, not social experiments, the mission. Winning wars, protecting America, defending freedom, keeping our enemies afraid of us, that is the military President Trump believes in. That is the military Pete Hegseth is rebuilding, focused on lethality in war fighting, to deter our enemies and sustain peace and prosperity. But under Joe Biden, Washington liberal elites decided they wanted to remake the military into a laboratory for woke politics, didn't they? They focus on pronouns instead of preparedness, climate seminars instead of combat readiness, diversity quotas instead of lethality, political correctness instead of the warrior culture. Recruitment collapsed, morale cratered, confidence in military leadership fell to historic lows. And our enemies noticed, China noticed, Russia noticed, Iran noticed, and the terrorists noticed, didn't they? Didn't they? Weakness invites danger. I saw it all. And the American people knew something was wrong too, because they could see it, couldn't you? Right before your very eyes. It was shameful. They saw a military leadership class more interested in MSNBC and the ladies on The View applause than battlefield victory. I'll tell you, the troops I deployed with, like Steve Brown right there, the best and most capable joint special operations forces in the world that included SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, Special Operations Aviation, just like the Night Stalkers from down there in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, a lot to be proud of, Kentuckians, and including those young service members on their very first deployment. They did not sign up to defend our nation to be lectured about pronouns. And their parents didn't send them off for that, did they? No, they did not. They signed up to fight and defend this nation and our families, didn't they? God bless them. And they deserve better than what Joe Biden and the liberal elites gave them. So readiness, retention, and recruiting plummeted, and our enemies were on the march, weren't they? Right before our very eyes. That is why so many veterans, active duty troops, and military families turned to President Trump. They were desperate for a commander-in-chief, willing to stand up and say enough against all odds, didn't they? How many times they tried to kill him? 3? How many times they indicted him? You're going to use all your fingers and toes, aren't you? At least I do. You know, I struggled in school. Okay. They were desperate. Enough is enough. Pete Hegseth was one of those courageous leaders too, wasn't he? Before he ever stepped into the Pentagon, Pete was fighting this battle publicly when it was unpopular to do so. I have his book long before this election, The War on Warriors, right? God bless him for publishing that and exposing that. You better believe they were coming after us. He spoke for the war fighters. He spoke for the troops. He spoke for the combat veterans who were sick and tired of watching politicians weaken the greatest military on earth and encourage our enemies to be emboldened. And he paid a price for it. But real leaders don't back down when pressure comes, do they? No. They lean into it. That is exactly why President Trump put Pete Hegseth in the lead at the Pentagon. Think about where we are in history right now. And you're having the Secretary of War coming here to little old Kentucky to see you today. Is that something? That's something to be proud of. That reflects on you. I can't take credit for that. That reflects on you. I mean, there's few folks more busier than him. It's like the day before Christmas for Santa Claus. He's flat dadgum busy, isn't he, with everything he's got going on. Because President Trump knows the difference between a bureaucrat and a warfighter, and he picked a warfighter and picked Hegseth. Together they're doing what the political class said couldn't be done. They are rebuilding the strength, confidence, and warrior ethos of our armed forces, bear with me on this, from the inside out. Got that? The inside out. That's culture. Because military strength starts with a culture, a warrior culture. You cannot deter our enemies if your troops are distracted by politics. You cannot project strength if retention and recruiting is collapsing. And President Trump understands something the political class never will. Peace comes through strengths, just as President Reagan knew, didn't he? Didn't he? We're seeing the same contours, aren't we? Not apologies, not weakness, not decline, strength. That is President Trump's vision for global peace and prosperity. And every American that loves this nation should stand behind it. I learned about strength the hard way. I learned it in operations where every decision mattered. I learned it from senior enlisted leaders who taught me what real leadership looked like Senior Chief Steve Brown right there. The kind that does not come from a briefing room or a book, but it comes from being the first one out the door and the last one back in. I've seen what happens when America is strong. I've seen what happens when America is weak and it hesitates. I've served alongside extraordinary Americans who carried the weight of this country on their backs without asking for any recognition. God bless them and their families. Men who repeatedly miss birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and more to serve our nation without fanfare. They didn't join to be social media celebrities. Men who came home changed forever. Some who never came home at all. Too many. I think about them every day. I think about the families who got that fateful knock on their door. People many times ask me, Ed, what's the hardest thing you ever did? Navy SEAL training, Ranger training? No, it was not. It was to put on my dress uniform with the chaplain and be the face of the worst day of the life of those parents. I hope y'all got that back here. I think about those families every day. It'll sear your soul when you live that world. I think about the kids growing up with that folded flag on the mantle. Every medal I received, whether it was my 4 Bronze Stars or any other recognition, belongs just as much to the men beside me as it does to me. I can't take credit for that whatsoever. No, I cannot. Because in the military, nothing is accomplished as known. Teamwork is the center of gravity. And one thing every combat understands is this: the world is dangerous, evil is real, and weakness gets people killed. I've seen evil up close. I've looked it in the eye through the front sight of a rifle in combat. I can tell you the only language evil understands is strength. They don't care about social media tweets or posts. That is why President Trump's vision for the strongest military in the world is not a campaign slogan. It's a matter of our nation's survival, and it puts deterrence back on the table so we don't have to have hostilities. And today, that's right, he knows that. And today, under President Trump, Pete Hegseth, we're finally moving back in the right direction, aren't we? We're restoring standards based on warfighting, restoring accountability and performance and leadership, restoring deterrence for peace and prosperity, just like President Reagan did, correct? Restoring pride and service. Have you seen the retention and recruiting is skyrocketing? Parents are glad to be taking them youngins down there to join, aren't they? We are telling young Americans once again that the military is not a social club. It is not a political activist organization. It is a warrior institution dedicated to defending the United States of America based on a long tradition. That matters. Because the young Marines standing post tonight, it matters. The pilots flying missions all around the world, it matters. The Army Rangers deployed overseas with other troops, it matters. The ships at sea with sailors, it matters. The special operators hunting terrorists in places we can never talk about doing what our nation asks, it matters. And it matters to their families too, doesn't it? I was that guy once for a career that spanned 3 decades, so I know what it's like to be a long way from home on a hard mission, wondering whether the people back in Washington had your back or not. Those folks we just talked about deserve a commander-in-chief who has their back and leaders they can trust. They have them in Donald Trump, and they have them in Pete Hegseth, don't they? Not political distractions dreamed up by bureaucrats in Washington or people that are hung up on doing social media tweets. I believe in something else. America still produces the greatest fighting men and women in the world because of their parents and their grandparents. Have I got that right? We have not lost that spirit. It is there, and you epitomize that being here today. You see it in the next young generation, patriots stepping forward to serve in record numbers. You see it in veterans across the country who still believe America's worth fighting for. And that is why I am running, to be a champion for them and their families in Washington, D.C. I came home from wars, and I looked at Washington and the misrepresentation of our values, and I said, somebody's got to do something. It just won't be me. For the same reason I joined in 1983. There was no books or movies about SEALs. There was no bonus to join. I never met a SEAL. But by golly, if one farm boy from Kentucky was going to make a difference, then that's the way I was going to do it. I was 26 years old. I wasn't 19 out of high school. I wasn't 22 out of college. I was full grown from a dairy farm. Politicians up there who never carried a rifle in combat make decisions about young Americans who would, and that's not acceptable. Because leadership matters, culture matters, courage at the top matters, and that's why President Trump's leadership matters. That's why Pete Hegseth's leadership matters. It sends a message to our enemies. America's done apologizing for its strength. America's done weakening itself from within. America's done putting politics ahead of national security. Under President Trump, we're rebuilding fighting strength, and we are returning the principles that made our nation the most feared and respected force on earth to maintain peace and prosperity. So Pete Hegseth, I want to thank you for coming today, your courageous leadership. Thank you for carrying out President Trump's vision for the strongest military this world's ever seen. Thank you for your willingness to fight for our men and women in uniform and their families. And thank you for helping restore pride, strength, and confidence in the United States military. And to everyone here today, thank you for believing in this nation. You're patriots. I'm going to tell you, Steve will tell you, SEAL Team 6, Area 51, that's not the secret weapon. You are. You patriots are the secret weapon of this great nation. Thank you for what you do. For standing with President Trump, Pete Hegseth, as we lead our nation back to prominence. God bless our troops. God bless our veterans. God bless our families. And continue to God bless America. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for coming today. folks. I think y'all ought to agree the second busiest guy in the world right now to President Trump is Pete Hegseth. His plate is full, but he's got a great team under him. It is my pleasure to introduce a fellow Ranger here today to little old Kentucky. Thank you for coming, Pete. We are honored by your presence here today, and we look forward to your remarks. And all that to say, I really enjoyed the time up here with you today, and I look forward to talking with you folks more. Thank you.
How we doing, folks? How we doing? Well, outstanding. It's wonderful to be here with all of you.
That's good Navy talk.
Is that good Navy? Oh, we're going to do this Navy-Army thing now, too? You already started it, didn't you? Well, it's great to be in Kentucky with great Americans. I just came from Fort Campbell with other great Americans, the best of our nation, and it's an honor to be here with all of you. I have to say up front, for the lawyers, that I'm here in my personal capacity as a private citizen, a fellow American, and a fellow combat veteran, here to support Navy SEAL Ed Gallrein. Now, I'll admit, as an Army guy, we're supposed to try to give Navy SEALs a hard time, but Ed was not only a leader in SEAL Team 6, but also Ranger qualified, which feels just a bit excessive, unnecessary. By the way, you got one thing wrong. I'm not Ranger qualified. You are. So I'm just an Army infantryman. You got me on every level. And we're so grateful for your service. But the truth is, that combination tells us a lot about Ed. This is not a guy who chased comfort. This is a man who volunteered for the hardest assignments, surrounds himself with warriors, and led from the front when the stakes were life and death. And trust me, men don't follow you in those environments because you have good talking points. They follow you because you've earned their trust. They follow you because you perform under pressure. They follow you when things get dangerous and chaotic. You move toward the mission instead of away from it. And America desperately needs even more of that leadership right now. Now, I do have to say this. I had a chance to look over Ed's military record, and it's quite impressive. Multiple Bronze Stars, 2 presidential unit citations. I had a chance to give one to the USS Ford, returning just a couple days ago. They're rare. It's the Navy Cross of unit citations. It's impressive. But unlike politicians in Washington, you don't get those for podcasting or pontificating. And you don't get medals like that for explaining why everybody else is wrong. You earn them through leadership and through sacrifice and performance under pressure. All of that matters. Because America is starving for those types of leaders. And after spending years around soldiers and Marines and SEALs and Rangers and medics and airmen and infantrymen, you learn something really quickly from the best of America. There's a massive difference between those who talk about leadership and people who actually lead. Trust me, we already have plenty of talkers in D.C., plenty of consultants, plenty of bureaucrats, plenty of career politicians who've never carried a responsibility heavier than a committee hearing. Not enough warfighters. Not enough men who've actually had to make those hard decisions under pressure. Not enough leaders who understanding service before self, about being on a team, about leading and about following. And that's why this race matters. And that's why I'm proud here to stand with Ed Gallrein. Because he led warriors in combat. He led at the very highest levels of special operations. He served with distinction as a Navy SEAL and rose into leadership within the elite ranks of SEAL Team 6. one of the most demanding combat organizations on planet Earth. I've had a chance to see firsthand what those men do. It's extraordinary, and it's not made for the vast majority of Americans. Ed's is not a manufactured politician. He's not a social media celebrity trying to be a conservative fighter. He's not someone who discovered patriotism because a pollster told him it was popular. You don't get what he has by accident. You don't get there because you've mastered the language of Washington social circles. You get there because men trust you with their lives. You get there because when things get dangerous and chaotic, you move toward the mission instead of away from it. And right now, America needs that kind of leadership right alongside President Trump. President Trump needs those kinds of reinforcements. Because let's be honest about where we are. Under Joe Biden, Washington rewarded weakness. Corporate America cowered to the woke mob. Politicians served themselves, as politicians often do. And while all this is happening, the people who actually fight America's wars were watching their institution, the one they loved so much, consumed with nonsense. Woke trainings, political indoctrination, diversity quotas, climate seminars, pronouns, dudes in dresses. I'm not kidding. Standards were lowered, troops were undercut. We need more of that t-shirt right there. I identify as American. Americans watched our military become more concerned with not offending activists than preparing warriors to win wars. I've said that for years. America cannot afford a woke or weak military. We need a lethal and ready military. We need warfighters. We have ended the war on warriors. President Trump told me when he first offered me this job, he said, "Pete, you're going to have to be tough as shit." Sorry. He did. You ready? They're going to come after you. And boy, was he right. He was right. But that's also what Ed represents. A warfighter, a man forged through service. And here's the thing about men who come from that kind of world. They don't scare easily. Washington doesn't intimidate them. The media doesn't intimidate them. The Twitter mob doesn't intimidate them. Because after you've led men in life and death situations, the games that are played inside the Beltway start looking pretty small. Now contrast that with what we've gotten from Tom Massie. At some point, being against everything becomes an excuse for accomplishing nothing. At some point, constant obstruction is not leadership, it's just commentary. It's obstruction. President Trump does not need more people in Washington who are trying to make a point, especially from his own party. He needs people willing to help him win, to vote with him when it matters the most. And too often, Thomas Massie has acted like his job is to stand apart from the movement that President Trump leads instead of strengthening it. When President Trump needs backup, Massie wants to debate process. When the movement needs unity, especially at the biggest moments, Massie's willing to vote with Democrats. When conservatives are fighting the most radical left in American history, too often Massie's instinct is to throw elbows at fellow Republicans instead of the people who are destroying our country or want to destroy our country. And there's one man standing in their way, and it's President Trump. And President Trump needs reinforcements. And that's what warfighters do. They stand behind leaders and have their back. Warfighters understand mission. They understand teamwork. They understand loyalty. And they understand that in the middle of a fight, you don't weaken your own side. You advance to the objective. And that's what Ed Gallrein understands because he has lived it. The best warriors, like Ed, are usually the most humble men in the room. If you've met him and you've met them, you know the type. They don't need applause. They don't seek the spotlight. They don't confuse publicity with accomplishment. Ed Gallrein's record speaks for itself. Thomas Massie's record speaks for itself, too. Too much grandstanding, too few great votes. Years of acting like being difficult is the same thing as being courageous. It's not. Real courage means stepping up when the mission matters most, when we need that tough vote to beat left-wing lunatic Democrats the most. Real courage means understanding that this country is facing existential threats and deciding to be part of the solution instead of constantly trying to position yourself above the fight. Kentucky has a choice in this race. You can send a warrior, reinforcements for the president in our shared fight against the radical left, or you can send an obstructionist. In my mind, it's an easy choice. You can send a Navy SEAL determined to fight for President Trump's agenda and with his full endorsement to help save this country. Because I'll tell you, based on what we're up against, that's exactly what this moment requires. Strength, clarity, conviction, and unity. This moment demands leaders who love this country unapologetically, like President Trump and like Ed Gallrein. Leaders who believe America is worth defending. Leaders who understand peace comes through strength. Not apologies, not weakness, not surrender. And leaders who stand with President Trump. In the military and in the past few years, I've had the chance in the front line to see courage under pressure, to see sacrifice, to see brotherhood, and that spirit still exists in this great country. It's incredible to watch the best of our country, the real 1%, do their job every single day on behalf of us with no desire for the spotlight. It is still very much alive. Don't look to Washington to it for the most part. Look to our country and to our formations. But now America needs to bring more of that same spirit into the halls of Congress. Now is not the time to sit on the sidelines. President Trump is leading the fight to restore American greatness. I have a chance to see it every single day. And what he needs and what he deserves, he needs reinforcements. He needs to bolster our ranks, not obstructionism. He has enough obstruction from Democrats. We need reinforcement from Republicans. And that fight requires a Congress full of warriors, including Ed. This one, ladies and gentlemen, is a no-brainer. Ed, thank you for stepping up. Thank you for your willingness to raise your right hand again. You did, knowing and understanding what you did in the military, you could have hung it up and done anything you want. Instead, you're deciding to get back into the arena. That says a lot about you in the toughest of races. It says a lot about you. You are badly needed. So good luck, Godspeed, God bless Kentucky and our great republic. Thank you very much. Thank you.